So, if any of you have recently watched Castaway or are planning to watch it, I want you to view it as it's a really accurate parable of like self sabotage, self destruction, or even addiction. Almost all of us at some point are going to experience like our rock bottom, where life is going really well and then you experience a crash. So right out of the gate in the beginning of the movie, you notice that there's that lady who creates that package, and she lives on the open road, and that's foreshadowing. But there's what I noticed in this movie. There's a lot of symbolism and meaning with the open road, and I'll come back to that. It's funny because this movie was made, I think, in the late '90s. Yeah, and so now you can't hear Tom Hanks' voice without hearing Woody from Toy Story. Like they're really showing that Tom Hanks' character, Chuck Nolan, is just always in a hurry. Like time is such a critical piece of his life.
87 hours is a shameful outrage. This is just an egg timer.
But I remember the first time I saw this movie, it was the most like graphic depiction of a plane crash I'd seen, that it like haunted me. This is not a movie that you would watch like on a flight. The island in Castaway represents that place of isolation and aloneness and loneliness. And most of us, when we find ourselves in that alone place, we kind of hope and wait for somebody to come rescue us. As long as we wait for somebody else to come rescue us, we're going to be stuck on that island. One of the biggest complaints I remember when this movie was first released was that there's just way too much time on the island. But the thing that I think that they're really trying to convey is that just how long it can take for us to learn really hard, painful lessons. Like, you are stuck until you figure out that you are the one that has to rescue you. Also, it's definitely worth noting like how elite of an actor Tom Hanks was for this role, because Tom Hanks lost 55 pounds. He went from 225 to 170 for this role. The symbolism of the waves when the first time he tries to escape the island. I think back on this illustration often, like when you're in a place of self-isolation and you try to like overpower like your impulses or your self-destructive habits or your coping mechanisms or whatever, those waves, they're like the first attempt is always hardest, and like the first day, like, or when you're trying to like grieve someone or get over someone, the first day is always the hardest. And it's like you have to overcome those waves. As humans, in our human experience, when we're in like a place of isolation or self-destruction, there is a time we spend in the wilderness where we have to sort of learn, and we have to navigate in our wilderness and sort of become wild. And yeah, you'll notice his first attempt in trying to overcome those waves, it's just too much for him. It's just, he can't overcome them. And then he's just tossed right back onto the island and just has to endure more loneliness. A lot of us, yeah, we'll do that. We'll make a really noble, valiant attempt to overcome those waves, to escape our island. But then it's just too much. It's too hard. So we go back, and that's a relapse. So the part where he kind of retreats into the cave here and his flashlight dies, like I don't really know exactly what the directors and producers and writers of this movie were trying to communicate, but all I can speak is my own personal experience, and that's kind of the takeaways that I have. But how many of you can relate, like when you were in that place of self-sabotage and isolation where your light was just completely diminished? I remember a friend even told me, like, your light and your like vibration is lower than it's ever been. And it's crazy. Just the symbolism. I mean, the flashlight in this case is like a pretty useful tool for him, but just after that moment of like total defeat and like relapse, then his light is completely diminished and he's at rock bottom, literally on a rock, on the rocky bed of the cave, licking water out of a puddle. The introduction of Wilson, the best supporting actor probably in all of Tom Hanks' movies. But Wilson, I mean, think about it. Wilson's whole existence is just a projection from Tom Hanks' character. The narrative when you hear Chuck Nolan having dialogue with Wilson, Wilson is that protective self, the part of Chuck that won't allow Chuck to take any chances or take any risks or try to leave the island. And when we're on our island, that's the version of ourself that is the loudest voice, is that protective, like negative inner narrative. Notice when Chuck figures out how to make the fire, it's when he has a companion and when he's leaned into his creativity. And what is fire? Fire is light. It's a source of light. And his light is somewhat restored in that moment. That's like one of the highlights of the movie, is when he figures out fire. And so it's just really interesting to note that even that the way that you journey out of your place of self-sabotage and isolation is into your own belief in yourself. When you bet on yourself and you take little chances and you take little steps forward and you lean into your own creativity and you trust your own judgment.
Look what I have created! I have made fire!
4 years later, I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, I couldn't believe. I'm like, what the heck? The writers put him there for 4 years? But then, as I experience life, it's yeah. You're stuck until you learn, until you conjure up the courage to save yourself. We all have the ability to be our own hero. It really takes like a lot of bravery, and honestly, it takes a lot of courageous authenticity. Then that porta potty comes in like serendipity, and we'll notice in our own lives that happens from time to time, and we can't ignore those little opportunities. The thing that really helps Chuck escape this island is his creativity and him formulating a plan, and then he incrementally executes that plan and sticks to that plan, and then he's just shy of that rope, and Wilson, again, is a projected negative self of Chuck, reminds Chuck that there is extra rope, and it reminds him of a time of his life that he was ashamed of, where Chuck obviously tried to hang himself. The ironic part is that for Chuck to move on, Wilson had to stay behind. And I really believe that, obviously that was intentional. This was a fictional story and it was written by writers, so they put that in there for a reason. But yeah, the negative self, the part of you that keeps reminding you of the parts of your life that you're ashamed of, cannot go with you when you escape your island. And then launch day, where he's got a lot of hope and he finally gets past those waves. Like he finally, all his preparation and his hard work and his plan worked, and his one secret weapon was the porta potty from Bakersfield that gave him that extra push. And then once he's past those waves, there's that moment where he looks back at the island and becomes emotional, because even though it was his place of rock bottom and loneliness and just the worst part of his life, he learned so much about himself. And when we're in that place of isolation, it's like we don't get to leave until we learn the lessons we were put there to learn. And usually it's lessons that we had neglected and run away from our entire lives. And usually it's those coping mechanisms and like self-destructive patterns that keep us, that put us there and keep us there. And it's such a radical dismantling and like such a positive disintegration that we shed. Just like his tooth was the thorn in his side, it was like symbolism there. You don't get to leave your island until you have become the version of yourself that can leave the island. And finally, it took him 4 years. He lost so much time, and time used to be his like most cherished entity. Now all he cares about is just the people that he sacrificed his time. For those of you who have experienced like a devastating heartbreak, like a loss of a relation, maybe a divorce, the parallels where Chuck spent 4 years hoping that he would get like another chance with Kelly, that Kelly would be there waiting for him, and then he comes home and she's moved on and she's remarried, and just that heartbreak that he experiences. But the one thing that he now has is the willingness to be alone. He learned how to be alone. He realized that really it wasn't that attachment to Kelly that kept him moving forward. It was his unintentional learning of how to bet on himself. The part where Chuck goes to Kelly's house is like the new best version of Chuck, and he's on a quest for truth. And that whole moment where like he finally gets to spend some time with the person that compelled him to keep going. And you know, I like to think that Kelly and Chuck did actually end up getting back together, because I mean, with that level of love, Chuck comes back to life in Kelly's eyes. She married the orthodontist guy, and that wasn't who she wanted. Chuck's back, you know? Like, so she's not going to be happy with her husband. So, you know, I like to think that eventually Kelly divorces her husband, and then, you know, Chuck and Kelly get to live happily ever after with, you know, Kelly's daughter, and it's all good and fine, you know, especially this day and age. That integrity that Chuck has, where he tells Kelly, you have to go home.
You have to go home.
I have to keep breathing, because tomorrow the sun will rise, and who knows what the tide will bring in. That is such a beautiful parable for life.
You gotta keep breathing. Because tomorrow the sun will rise. Who knows what the tide could bring?
Like, even when you're stuck on your island, when you're in your lowest point, if you can just keep breathing, stay hopeful, who knows what the tide's gonna bring in. The part where he delivers the package to Betina, the lady who lives in the open road, that is the thesis of the whole movie. They allude to it in the very beginning. It starts with the open road, ends with the open road. And the lesson that I've learned in life recently is that I was afraid of loneliness, but I learned to embrace aloneness and be okay with being alone. When you reframe aloneness as freedom, you're actually free. Then you have any road you choose. You have the open road, and you can choose any direction that you go. Nobody to check on you, nobody depending on you. That's a gift. Betina, her whole symbol of the wings and the freedom, that's what helped Chuck navigate his aloneness and finally get back to being in control of his life by escaping the island. When the two cross paths, her advice to him is basically, you're free to go any direction you choose, cowboy.
If you turn right, that'll take you to Amarillo, Flagstaff, California. And if you head back that direction, you'll find a whole lot of nothing all the way to Canada.
I got it.
All right, then. Good luck, cowboy.
And then it ends there. And I really believe that that is such a beautiful parable for life. We can be constricted to time and other people's agendas and other people's expectations of our life, and we can seek perfectionism and people pleasing and our need for external validation, and we try to make ourselves small and really suppress who we truly are so that we can fit into a world that doesn't really care about us. And then once that is dismantled and you go through that process of absolute breaking, but what emerges is your authentic self without all the pressure and the burden of baggage, and then you're free. And you get to choose whatever road or whatever journey you want, whatever direction you want. And it's a painful process to get there, but it's such a beautiful crossroads to stand.